For the first time on the Metal Voice, Ivan, Men Without Hats.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good, good. Yeah, okay. It's new wave, it's pop, but we'll try to grab a little bit of hard rock and metal in this conversation to make it a little interesting for everyone out there. Okay.
Cool. Yeah,
All right, man. I'm glad you're on the show. I'm a big fan. I've been a
glad to
fan
be
for a
here.
long, long time. Uh,
Cool.
Great news. You got a new single out. I love the
We
80s.
do. Yep. It's
Um,
doing well. People are liking it. It's great.
I love it. It really brings me back to the 80s. And not only was the 80s a time when pop and new wave were popular, but even hard rock and metal. All the bands had the big hits. Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, it was fun times. It was new. It was like a breath of fresh air. It was a lot of things were new. There was video, there was, computers were starting to come in for us and the electronic scene and just a lot of new stuff, a lot of new colors. It was kind of a breath of fresh air from the dying days of disco and sort of the dinosaur groups are just sort of going around in circles. So it was good. It was kind of a DIY period too, where you didn't have to be a virtuoso to be in a band. You just had to have good ideas and you could get away with it. So it was a lot of fun. I remember it was a lot of fun.
Why do you think that music today or new songs today, I guess I should rephrase this question. Why do you think that new artists today don't have their songs don't have that melody, or they don't have that sort of um, grasp that the 80s or the songs of the 80s had? And I'm not talking
Yeah,
about
well,
just
that's it.
one, all genres we're talking
Yeah, no, it's I don't know. Maybe there's I'm a big fan of rap music too, but I just don't know how many Eminem songs we're going to be singing around the campfire in 30 years. It's like that's what a lot of people remember about the 80s is there was good songs, it was good melodies, it was we tour with Howard Jones a lot, and I tell you, people sing his whole set. His whole set is like an hour and a half of just big, huge sing along. And it's great. People just remember the melodies. And even in pop music today, I mean, there's a lot of 80s influences with the drum sounds, synthesizers, and robot voices. But I don't know. I think people, rock music is kind of a dying art in a way. It was back in the days to make a record. It was kind of a big thing. You had to have a budget. You had to have a studio. You had to have a label. But now all you have to have is a computer
about.
and you're on your way. So it's kind of taken the magic out of it. And people like, I remember I was a big fan of Genesis, and the first time I saw Genesis, I saw a picture of Peter Gabriel with bat wings on his head in Cream magazine, and I had never heard the music, and I spent 6 months just dreaming about what does this band sound like before I got the record in my hands and was able to listen to it. But now it's like you know what these guys have for breakfast. It's like with the internet and everything, there's no mystery anymore. There's no discovering bands. They're just shoved down your throat and they're packaged along with your cable TV and your telephone, and it's a loss of mystery that I kind of deplore in the whole rock and roll world.
Do you think also that labels, since there are no labels today, there's no more butting heads like back in your day, the label, okay, what's the hit off of this album? What's going to be the hit? And a lot of times bands they were pushed into creating something more melodic because they had the pressure of the
Yeah,
label.
yeah. Well, there's no labels. The labels are making enough money selling Elvis and Michael Jackson records. They don't need to discover new bands anymore. And when they do discover new bands, they want them to have like 10 million TikTok viewers and this and that, and they want the bands to be happening already before they even dip their toes. Like there was good and bad things about labels. I tell you, one good story I tell all the time is the Pop Goes the World story, where I sent off a demo to New York, and my A&R guy in New York and at Polygram Records in New York was Derek Schulman, who was the lead singer for Gentle Giant,
No.
and he was he went on to like he started Roadrunner after that, and signed a lot of bands like Slipknot, and I mean he was he did really well as an A&R guy, and I sent him a demo for Pop Goes the World, and there was 10 songs on this cassette, and Pop Goes the World was a 1 minute long instrumental that I'd kind of just written, and I tagged it along, and it was just the melody basically. And my wife saying Pop Goes the World, a sample of her going Pop Goes the World, like, 2 or 3 times during the melody. And he got back to me and he said, you know what? You take those 10 songs on the tape and you just throw them away. Take that little instrumental and turn it into a real song. Write lyrics for it, write a chorus, put it together, make a 3.5 minute song. And if you do that, man, you're gonna have a hit on your hands. And like back in the days, I was kind of like, what, but I listened to him, and I'm I'm blessed that I did, and he knew what he was talking about, and the thing was a hit after I worked on it for a good 6 months and made a song out of it. And he said, and also he said, and write 10 more songs just like it, and we'll have an album. And so
And
I
you know
started
what?
from scratch.
If you would have been living in 2025, you would have said, "I'm putting out those demos." There would have never been that sort of
And that's it.
headbutting, not even a headbutting, but feedback, we'll say, from somebody who had
Exactly.
experience, right? Very
Exactly.
so.
There's that, but today there's kind of good and bad things too. Like, you don't have to put out a whole album now. It's kind of, we've gone back to the Beatles kind of thing, where
Yeah.
I grew up listening to the Beatles, and they would put out singles, they'd put out singles every month or so. And at the end of the year, they'd package all the singles into an album and put out an album for Christmas, and that's where we're kind of at now. You don't have to put a whole album out. You can, like what we just did, we just put out a single. I love the 80s, test the waters, see how people react. They like it, great. We'll go on, we'll put out more, and that's what we're doing. We have a full album release in November. We have a
Oh,
full album
good.
coming along with it. And so it's there's pros and cons. It's an ever evolving industry, and it's always fun.
Tell me about your roots. You grew up in Montreal, but you were born in the U.S.
Born in the U.S., I was born on the campus of the University of Illinois, the birthplace of the internet, and my dad was getting his master's and his PhD. And as soon as he got his PhD, he got a job at the University of Montreal, teaching there when they still had courses taught in English. So he was got a job there teaching, and we were all sent to French school. I grew up in French. I did all my schooling in French, and but grew up in Montreal. Was a fantastic place because it was kind of a slice of Europe, and I credit my getting into like progressive rock music, and it, from being in Montreal, like other bands were listening, other parts of Canada were listening to Bruce Coburn, and more sort of like Neil Young, and we were listening to Genesis and King Crimson and Yes and Pink Floyd, like way ahead of everybody else. Genesis would come to Montreal and play the Forum, and then go down to New York and play the Bottom Line to 300 people. We had we had a head start with all that music, and it was great. I saw a lot of great bands. I saw the Led Zeppelin 3 tour, at the old Montreal Forum. I saw Pink Floyd at the Autostad doing the Dark Side of the Moon tour.
That's
So,
great. Yeah.
it was a great era to 70s were a great era to grow up in musically. It was a lot of good stuff happening in the 70s. It was the birth of a lot of genres too, it was the birth of,
Supertramp got their start here. They
yeah,
were hugely successful here.
yeah.
So then you go down, you start, I guess your parents enrolled you in music, right? Or they taught you to become.
Yeah, my mother was a music teacher at McGill for 25, 30 years. So we had music in the family all big time, all the time.
So how did you go from, let's say, progressive rock to new wave in a sense, right? But there was a
Yeah,
bridge there, punk, right?
yeah. Well, the bridge was actually disco. And I've always said that, new wave music for me was a blend of progressive rock and disco. It was synthesizer music you could dance to. And it's kind of what I brought to the table. But when we first started Men Without Hats, it was a punk band. It was all guitars. It was punk rock.
Do you have demos?
And pardon me?
Do you have demos anywhere?
Oh, I think there must be a couple of songs floating around. I don't have,
Cassettes.
um, but that was it. We our first couple of shows were just punk rock shows in people's basements, and Hotel Nelson was actually the first professional gig we did. It was it was the Hotel Nelson down in the old Montreal was
Yeah.
kind of the punk club at the time. It was the only place where they would allow punk bands to get on stage. So it's,
My good friend Christian Gravener, he said he used to play hockey with your brother on the
he
street.
did, yeah,
Do you remember Christian?
yeah. He was Brenna Collins, yeah,
He's a good guy. Yeah. So you go from punk to new wave, right? You're saying, okay, now here comes this new technology, right? Joy Division's
right,
coming out, all this romantic new wave music's coming out.
yeah.
What was that like?
Well, that was, I was in the, playing punk rock, and then since I had taken piano lessons all my life, I was ready to switch over to synthesizers. Synthesizers were all brand new, just coming out, and we'd go down to the keyboard shop in the West End of Montreal and check out all the new synths, and I kind of decided, I made a conscious decision at one point that I wanted to be a professional musician, and also I wanted to reach the most people possible, and I figured that new wave, had a much bigger chance of getting on the radio for one thing than punk rock and that type of thing. Punk rock and new wave were kind of lumped together at the beginning. It was, in the back of the record store, there'd be one bin and it was punk new wave, and it was, and even in the clubs and playing shows, the punk band, we'd share the stage with punk bands. There weren't too many clubs that would allow punk new wave bands to play. And there was a common ideology. There was a shared philosophy of DIY, and there was a social commentary that ran through, both the punk scene and the new wave scene. There was kind of a rejection of the status quo. It was the Reagan Thatcher years, so things were, they were, people think that things are really hot, heating up now, and it was the same thing back then. There was people weren't too happy with Reagan either. They weren't too happy with Thatcher either, and things were hard for a lot of people. Things, the economy wasn't that great over in England, especially. That's what's caused the birth of punk rock and made it so easy for that scene to blossom, is because people were on board with the politics. So it was like I say, there was things happening back then too. So and we shared this common philosophy. Punk and new wave had this common ground, and so it wasn't that hard for me to switch over, because just all
Give
I
it
had
to
to
the
do was
man, kind of, right? Give it to the man attitude.
exactly
Yeah.
that was it. It was the rejection, like I said, the rejection of the status quo, and just this rejection. And that's what Safety Dance was all about too. It was all about marching to your own beat, and not succumbing to peer pressure, and I
You,
think that's one of the reasons why it
you,
still works today. It's
you've
people
talked
need to
about
hear
the
that message.
pogo dancing, right, in clubs. Is that a true story, or is that
Oh,
an
that's absolutely,
exaggeration?
that's a true story, the origin story. We'd go in like the late 70s, and we'd go to the clubs, and they'd slip in like I say, a Heart of Glass by Blondie, or the B-52's Rock Lobster, and we'd get up and start pogo dancing and bouncing off each other's chest, and bouncers had never seen that before, and thought we were fighting, and thought we were like, causing trouble, which we were kind of were, and everybody else was kind of disco dancing, and we're, sort of slam dancing in the middle. It was the precursor of the mosh pit and the precursor of slam dancing. That's where it all started. And we would get kicked out. We got kicked out a lot of places for pogo dancing to new wave music. And so went home and wrote a song about it, and the rest is history.
When you wrote that song, or when you recorded that song, did you say to yourself, you know what? This is going to be a big song.
Well, I'll tell you something. When you're a young songwriter, you think that everything you write is a great song, and you can't understand why people aren't lining up to throw money at you. So it wasn't even the first song we released off the album. We released another song. We released another. We thought another song had a much better chance, and it kind of went nowhere. And so we
Security?
it was I Got the Message.
Oh, I got the message. Yeah.
Oh,
So I
Rhythm of
remember
You.
watching Security. I mean, Claude Rojat, he used to have a show
Yeah.
on Access TV. He had the
Yeah.
videos. That was like the precursor to Much Music, right?
Oh yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
Security was on that. And I go, "What's this?" I go, "This is
Yeah.
this is new."
Yeah. Yeah. That was that was the precursor
Yeah.
to Much Music. That was, I think it was called Music Video. I think the
Yeah, I
show
think
was
something like
called.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
mean, you had your EP, Security was on that,
yeah,
and then you jump onto like a bigger label, right?
yeah. That EP got us. We put that out ourselves. We pressed, we pressed a 10-inch record, and we were doing shows. We started playing right away, and we started playing down in the States too. And we got it got us the attention. Well, the EP got signed to Stiff Record. It got started. We got signed to Stiff Record at the beginning, which was kind of a big label. It was a big thing for us. It was, Elvis Costello and stuff like that, and so they distributed it. And then through that, we got signed to a bigger label, and it was a guy. It was a record label in England called Static, and it was a guy who used to be on Virgin. Used to work for Virgin Records, and he started his own label and signed us. And we were stoked. We put up the money for us to go into studio and do a full record, and that's it. And so we did this whole thing. We did the record, and we were actually in studio. We put out a couple of singles, and it was, things, it nothing major happened at that point, but we were happy. We were stoked that he gave us money to go in and do another record. So we thought we were on cloud nine. We thought we'd made it. We were in studio recording the second record, a follow up to the Safety Dance record, and the Safety Dance, the remix. We did a remix, the 12-inch, and
Just took off.
the remix just took off. It went number one on the Billboard Dance Chart, and so we were pulled out of studio, put into a tour bus, and ended up spending the next 2 years just touring around, just doing shows and promoting it. So
I was
that's
I
when
was
that,
I was in Greece, I think, when the song was playing actually in a discotheque in Greece.
yeah,
So that's how far it reached. There was no internet back then, right?
no,
You actually had to
no,
have a physical copy of the record to actually play it
yeah.
in a
And
club.
it was the first, the one thing that really helped was the video for Safety Dance. I mean, it was the birth of MTV and Much Music, and back in the days, like MTV, there was only about they only had about 10 videos to play, and so we were in, like, it was just this major rotation. We were getting, the video was just on like nonstop, and so that really changed my life. It really sort of, I went from being a sort of a nobody to not being able to walk down the street. So it was a big factor, was the video too. It was,
You go on your follow-up album, your second album. Do you think because of the success of the first album that it overshadowed the second album?
oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, from that point on, people, every record label, they wanted Son of Safety Dance and Return of Safety Dance and Beneath the Planet of the Safety Dance, and like they wouldn't let me go, and I was trying to tell them, I got other stuff. No, 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 no. We want, just change the title and play the same song, but just change the title, and so things got pretty, and I had to, we actually, the record label dropped us. Imagine, like, we had this huge hit, and they were just like, okay, forget it, you're gone. And we had to sign a new label. We signed with Pop Goes the World and started up all over again with a new label, and basically the same thing happened. And we did Pop Goes the World, and after that they wanted, oh, we want Pop Goes the World Part 2 and 3 and 4, and just
Return
keep
of Pop
pumping up.
Goes the World,
Exactly,
Empire, the Pop Goes the World Strikes Back. Um,
exactly.
Jethro Tull, I interviewed Ian Anderson a few years ago,
Great guy.
and I
Yeah,
asked him, about until on Tuesday, and he goes, I didn't want to get paid because I do it out of love, right? He's not a hired gun. He refuses to be paid for something he wants to do.
yeah.
He loved the song too, and just tell me about that. Ian Anderson
It
and
was.
Jethro Tull comes right in your studio.
Yeah, and the connection was through Derek Schulman from Gentle Giant, who used to tour with. They toured with Tull back in the '70s, so he knew Ian, and he just thought it would, because of the Safety Dance video and the whole medieval thing. He thought it would be a great connection, which it was. And Ian came in, yeah, and all he asked for was a 6-pack of Grolsch beer and a Silver Shadow antique limousine to pick him up at the train station and drive him back after the gig. And he was great. I mean, he was just, I was really, really nervous, first of all, to meet him, because I grew up on Jethro Tull, so I was really, sort of really nervous. The second thing is that the part that he had to play, it sounds all like the same thing, but every single line in the song is different. There's little intricacies that make every little part different. And I didn't want to be the guy sitting there with the talk back button going, sorry, Ian, that, it's
He's
not that.
intimidating, man. He's intimidating.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't want to be the guy telling him what to do, but he came in and it was like one take. He knew every part. He knew all the little differences. He didn't have to be told anything. It was just an awesome experience. I haven't been let down. I can't even think of a time that I've been let down by one of my musical heroes. Like I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of the guys I grew up listening to, and like I say, and he was one of them. He was just, just you often hear like, oh, this guy's going to be he's going to be difficult. He's going to be this. He's going to be that. But he was awesome. He was awesome.
Do you think your Pop Goes the World is your Dark Side of the Moon? Looking
Kind
back
of,
at it,
I kind of modeled it off that. It was our concept. I wanted to make like an 80s new wave concept album, and it was definitely, I was definitely taken off Dark Side of the Moon when I was making it, and definitely referencing it and everything like that. Exactly,
whose
but
idea was the baby on the cover?
that was mine. Well, that was one of the things that we sort of I don't want to say prided ourselves, because I consider pride as a sin, but we made our own was the fact that we got across serious messages in a joyful way, in a happy way. Like we kind of made fun. We did a lot of fun things like the Bonhomme Carnival and just all these kind of goofy things that we did, and that thing too with the baby playing keyboards in the video. But the message was
It's a great
serious.
message.
It was a serious message, but it was delivered in a fun way. Like there's a lot of, and that was the difference between new wave and punk rock for me. Because punk rock, you get bands, that they have the same message, but they're screaming and shoving it down your throat. So it's just a different delivery. It's like to each his own.
Is Jenny the same girl that was in the Men Without Hats music video for Safety Dance?
No, no, those were
Somebody
all
asked me.
they're all
Somebody asked me that. I go, "Is that Jenny playing?"
no, no. That the girl in the video she was just a friend of the video producers. That's the only time she's ever done a video. She turned out she ended up being she's like a big time magazine editor for Condé Nast in Europe, and she was like she was the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine and stuff like that. But that was the only time that she'd ever done anything remotely like that. So
So
it
Jenny
was
was
pretty
a
fun.
complete different person altogether. Okay.
Yeah, it was all. Yeah,
Tell me about your connection with Voivod. You're wearing a shirt there.
I am. Voivod, they're just great pals. We were brought together by John Kasner, who used to sing for a band called the Doughboys, another
Yeah, Doughboys.
Montreal
Yeah,
band.
yeah, yeah.
And he introduced me to Michel. We were all hanging out at the same bar, but he kind of introduced us, and Michel and I just hit it off. We had a way. We had a lot of the same interests. We were both into like art and drawing and comic books and science fiction. I was a big science fiction fan, and music. We're big Van der Graaf Generator fans. Got along. I was a big good friend of Piggy's too. Piggy and I are about the same age. Away's a bit younger, but Piggy and I were the same age, so we grew up listening to the same music and everything like that. And we just hit it off. We just hit it off. And Michel Away played drums on the Sideways album that I did. He we did an old guitar album in the early 90s called Sideways, and he drummed on it, did all the drums, and toured with us. We toured the album, and he toured with us, and I ended up doing a couple of tracks on a couple of Voivod records too. And
You
but
co-wrote Nano Man, which is a great song.
yeah,
It's a great song. Nano Man is probably one of the best songs on that album. So, hats
mhm.
off to you co-writing that. You also did, was it The Outcast on Angel Rat?
Yeah. I played some keyboards on that, and did some drum sampling with Away would come over and sample my vintage synthesizers and for effects, like mostly drum effects. type of stuff, and that's where I sort of that was part of my participation. But it was just we still hang out, we still get along, we still communicate. Very
Great band, great bunch of guys too.
awesome band. Oh, they're
Um,
just great bands.
I saw your performance at Fafun. I think it was the release party of
Yeah,
Sideways. You
yeah.
had I think it was Away on Drums, Doughboys, and Mitsu. I think was there, right? And it
Mitsu, yeah.
was great.
No, that was great. That I mean, that whole album was born out of just like hanging out at the Biff Tech Club in Montreal on Saint Laurent. And after the club would close, we would head back to Voivod and Doughboys Jam Space. Like we just finish off the at 3 in the morning, head back and start jamming. And we just after we would be jamming, and I started writing songs, and we started playing these songs, and that just turned into the Sideways album. It just was really organic, and it was a lot of fun. It was one of the most fun musical experiences I've had. It was just fun times. When you're doing it for fun, I mean that's when the best music comes out. When you're with friends, a lot of bands start off like that. They start off with friends getting together and jamming, and it evolves into something bigger. But then you end up the money problems get in, the contracts and this and that, and so your friends end up not being your friends too much anymore, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole thing
yeah.
goes south, and that's happened to a lot of bands. But this Sideways project was, it wasn't meant to be a band in the first place. It was just guys getting together after the bars closed and trying to keep the night going, and so that it was a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
Coming full circle back to today. You're going to do a tour, right? You're going to go into Europe. I believe it's London. I got to look at carefully. I don't remember.
Yeah, we got the UK, then Netherlands, Germany, then Scandinavia. We end up in Sweden.
But you've got also the US, you got Canadian dates, you got Nova
Yeah.
Scotia, I see BC, I see Colorado, more of the West Coast, and then the UK. That's amazing. Great to see. What, I mean, the safety dance lives on The Simpsons, it lives in popular culture. Is this even your song anymore? It's just become this.
No, that's what I say. I've said this numerous times that the song doesn't belong to me anymore. It's a lot bigger than the band, like, and even the, people all over the world, they know that You Can Dance song. They don't know who does it or what my name is, but they know that You Can Dance song, So sometimes, and I've said this before too, like sometimes I feel like a musical curator going around and just presenting this musical artifact that brings immense joy to everybody, and it's definitely belongs to everybody. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It's part of the culture. We're blessed. I mean, we that it would that's still around. Shows like Glee. I mean, took that song and
Yeah, yeah.
and and delivered it to a whole new audience. And that's why we play shows now, and we have our original fans show up. They bring their kids and sometimes even their grandkids, and it's been cross generational now. So it's weird. That's you can't ask for much more. I tell you.
Any closing remarks?
Well, I think people just still need to hear the message that they can dance if they want to. I think that's
And the
one of the
80s.
reasons,
The
and that's it.
80s.
I love the '80s, and we played Canada Day in Fredericton a couple of days ago, and people like of all ages were getting into it and singing along. It's our first big sing along song, I think, and so it's
Yeah.
going to be good. We're having fun with it.
I'm looking forward to the new album. Good luck on the tour, and
Thank
I
you.
wish you all the success.
Well, thank you. Nice talking to you.
All right. Have yourself a great day.